there, and thank you for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what we're looking at. Mayor Brandon Johnson has a tough fiscal road ahead. Some recommendations from a top city budget watchdog.
How students are countering violence on Chicago's West Side in honor of Juneteenth.
Not only taste and texture and nutrition, but flakiness and fattiness.
A Chicago company hopes to save the seas by making faux fish.
To not understand our history is to miss out on what America is today.
And a TikTok historian on how he says Black history saved his life.
And now to some of today's top stories. Fallout from this weekend's mass shooting in southwest suburban Willowbrook that killed one and left at least 22 others injured. DuPage County officials say 33-year-old Willowbrook resident Reginald Meadows was killed in the attack that broke out at a Juneteenth celebration. It happened early Sunday morning at a strip mall parking lot off of Route 83. Police have not yet arrested anyone in connection with the shooting.
If you were off work today, that's because of that relatively new federal holiday, Juneteenth, marking the day in 1865 when the last enslaved people learned they were free. Chicagoans celebrated at festivals across the city, like this one at the DuSable Black History Museum. As a federal holiday, major banks and post offices were closed.
Celebrations all around today, and the city's getting a $6.8 million grant to build 8 new monuments. Mayor Brandon Johnson announced a gift today from the Mellon Foundation to fund the new monuments all across the city. Those include a Chicago Torture Justice Memorial, Race Riots Memorial, and a series of monuments that explore DuSable and Native American contributions to the settling of Chicago.
A major leader in Chicago's business community has died. John D. Nichols Jr. died last week following a long illness surrounded by family. Nichols was a top executive at Aerospace General Corporation when in 1979 he was recruited to come to Chicago to work at Illinois Tool Works, first as executive vice president and later as president and CEO. Nichols was an active participant in Chicago's civic life and philanthropy. His wife, Alexandra, has been a WTTW board member for more than 30 years. And you may know from hearing their names each night on our program that the Nichols are strong supporters of WTTW and WTTW News. And we'll have more on John Nichols later on in the program.
Yeah, absolutely. Our sympathies with Alexandra and the entire Nichols family. And coming up in just a bit, how a group of students are countering violence on Chicago's West Side.
But first, what a top city budget watchdog has to say about Chicago's fiscal outlook right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
There's a tough road ahead when it comes to getting the city's finances in order. The Civic Federation, a nonpartisan taxpayer watchdog group, has a new report laying out options and recommendations for city officials to help address those challenges. And some of those challenges include recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and the end of federal recovery funds, the city's public safety crisis, a chronically high liability burden, the city's pension shortfall, and a persistent structural deficit. And joining us to talk about all of these and some potential solutions is Sarah Wetmore, acting president of the Civic Federation. Sarah Wetmore continuing in the great tradition of Lawrence Massall in putting out these budget recommendations. Welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you.
Let's outline the scope of the issue. How big is the year-to-year structural deficit that the city faces?
Well, what we're talking about when we're talking about a structural deficit is a chronic mismatch between ongoing revenues and ongoing expenditures. And so the city has made progress on this. It's been a long-term issue, but it's made progress since the worst of the pandemic, and that's through Federal American Rescue Plan Act funding. That's through recovery in resources since as it's recovered from the pandemic. And so what we're seeing is a smaller structural deficit, but one that's going to be impacted in the coming years by, for example, we're seeing a softening in state revenues that could increase the structural deficit. We're also seeing a potential for a recession, all of which would impact what the Johnson administration needs to do to balance the budget.
And the end of some of that federal COVID funding as well.
Right.
You talk about the pension funds. We've talked about this for years and years and years. So collectively, they're about 24% funded. What does that mean to the average taxpayer?
So progress, again, that the city has made is in terms of making a larger contribution to its pensions according to actuarial need on that funding projection to get to 90% funded eventually. However, in order to make those contributions, $2.7 billion this year, that takes 20% of the city budget. That's funds that can't be spent on other priorities. So that's where you see where a person on the street might see the crowding out of other kinds of expenditures.
20% spent on that, and also, as mentioned in your report, 20% just on debt
right.
service. So that's 40% of the budget here on things that taxpayers won't really see any tangible impact from. So your report talks about different revenue options, many of which the new mayor has brought up: congestion tax, city income tax, corporate head tax, LaSalle Street transaction tax. You don't take a position on them, but what are the pluses and minuses of some of these options?
So what we're trying to do here is provide something of a one-stop shop for the new mayor, for the new members of the city council, when they're looking for the options that they have in order to, again, to close that structural deficit going forward. And what we're looking to do is to provide some information to them on how these revenues get implemented. Can the city do it itself? Does it require state statute? In addition to those, like you said, some of the pros and cons. In addition to that, there's also a context that people need to know. You know, if you're going to implement a city income tax, you know, that would need to be passed at the state level. And then there would need to be considerations of how does that fit in with the rest of the income tax in the state and at the federal level.
So these would be very heavy lifts, even with all Democratic majorities downstate and a Democratic governor. But many of these taxes, not just the city income tax, he would have to get approval from Springfield, all but for the corporate head tax. So he's pledged no property tax hikes. Do you believe that you can help solve this structural deficit over the coming years without raising property taxes?
Well, it's important to think of property taxes sort of in the context of, you know, how they fit in with the rest of what the city taxes. It's important, they're an important source of revenue because they are reliable. They come in and year out at the same level. They're not necessarily tied to the economic trajectory. But they are also very visible. They're billed twice a year, and people are very tuned in to how much their property tax is going to be. So it's important for the mayor and the city council to look at the full plan for what they're going to be doing going forward. And the property tax could be a part of that, but if it's not going to be, then they're going to need to find some other options.
Some of the things you are recommending for efficiencies in this report are combining the treasurer and clerk's office, having the size of city council, so half the amount of council members that exist now. Why are these the recommendations that you're putting forward?
So another part of this report is pulling together recommendations that the Civic Federation, that other organizations have made over decades to improve sort of the structure of the city and also ameliorate places where the city is something of an outlier. The size of the city council is extremely much larger than the other large cities in the United States. It's 50 alderpersons here. For the rest of the cities, it's an average of 18. So it stands to reason that if other cities can operate with a smaller city council, so can the city of Chicago.
I think it's only 15 in LA, right?
That's right.
A city with a sizable population. All right, Sarah Wetmore, a roadmap here for Brandon Johnson and city council members. Thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Thank you for having me.
And up next, diving into sustainable alternatives to seafood. But first, we take a look at the weather. You've heard of and perhaps tried plant-based meats, popular alternatives to the real deal that taste like meat but are instead made of ingredients like soy. But what about faux fish? A Chicago company is aspiring to offer a safer, more sustainable option to seafood. June is National Oceans Month. That's a time dedicated to raising awareness of the dangers facing oceans. What better time than for Amanda Vinicky to dive in?
The world's oceans and the marine life that live in them are under threat. Warming temperatures due to climate change, pollution, and overfishing.
I read a stat recently from a 2020 report that shared that 35% of our global fisheries are overexploited, and that's up from 10% in 1990. So it's like this really exponential impact.
They're literally scooping up the bottom of our oceans to catch whatever, and then you run into issues like bycatch, right? So we're scooping up turtles in these nets or dolphins.
Brittany Chibi witnessed the damage firsthand when diving the Great Barrier Reef.
When people talk about coral bleaching, I couldn't wrap my head around what that meant, right? And then I go there and I saw it with my own eyes, and it was truly, it's skeletons, right? It's these coral skeletons in the ocean, And without the corals, the fish aren't there to feed on it, and it just creates this terrible domino effect and just really killing off this ecosystem.
So Chibi teamed up with Ann Palermo on a startup dedicated to tackling the issue of overfishing. The duo had met years before at a networking event for food entrepreneurs. At the time, they were each running health food companies. Then, in early 2020, Palermo got the idea for aquacultured foods.
What we're going to see is that due to overfishing of our oceans and climate change, we're running out of fish in the sea. And so the only real solution that we have is alternative seafoods, because if people keep continuing to eat fish at the rate they are, there's not going to be any left.
We're doing an inside-out roll, so the rice is going to be on the outside.
Their company is serving a solution.
Start off with our tuna strip.
This sushi's made of fungus that looks like fish. While patents are pending, Palermo and Chibi are tight-lipped about how they make their versions of tuna, scallops, and shrimp.
I wish we could be a little bit more, but we have to be careful. There are so many companies out there now, like trying to mimic our products and our technology.
But they'll say this much. The faux fish is made of a mushroom root called mycelium that's fermented and manipulated.
The great thing about this product and how we grow it is that it very, very closely resembles seafood to begin with. And so what we're able to do is then just through just like the growth process and the technology and the environmental conditions and the nutrition that we feed our microorganism, our kind of mushroom, it develops and grows, and so we can change the texture of the product.
But they're mindful the product doesn't get too fishy in the colloquial sense, as in no laundry list of hard-to-pronounce ingredients.
It is very clean label. You know, our product is 2 ingredients. And then, right, we can add color and flavor downstream to create different species that we want to replicate.
Our whole business or value proposition is to be a one-to-one replacement for traditional seafood. And so everything taste, texture, nutrition is positioned to be exactly the same.
With some exceptions. They want it to be more affordable and for it to last longer, up to 4 weeks when fresh. Making that happen is food product developer Devin Truelove's job. He's responsible for fine-tuning.
I work on the color, I work on marination development, shelf life stability.
And taste. Unlike traditional seafood, there's no hazard of mercury or other contaminants.
There are some other perks. For example, those of us who are pregnant and can't have sushi, well, here's a viable alternative. Also, anybody who has allergies to seafood or crustaceans, not an issue here.
Aquacultured can't say when the public will get to try, just that they plan to test in restaurants soon. In the meantime, the Sheds Wagner has advice on how to combat overfishing.
Salmon, tuna, and shrimp are the most popular seafood items here in the United States. And so if we continue to eat those in really big amounts, we're going to continue to kind of put pressure on those wild populations. So if people can think about diversifying their seafood diet or looking at local fish sources.
By local, she means kopi, trout, or whitefish, not aquacultured fish. At least not yet. For Chicago Tonight, I'm Amanda Vinicki.
And if you want to be conscious about your seafood consumption, Wegner has some other tips. Look for grocers and restaurants with certification that proves the fish they sell is sustainably raised or caught. Check the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch for the green light on what's safest. The Shed also has a list of local restaurants committed to healthier rivers, lakes, and oceans. Realize that farm-raised fish aren't always preferable. They may be raised with hormones and pesticides. Aquacultured Foods says their products are mercury-free and vegan safe. Brandis.
They make for good snacks too, Paris. Thank you. A group of students are countering violence on Chicago's west side by planting peace gardens today in honor of Juneteenth. But this isn't something out of the ordinary for them. They're known as peace warriors, born out of North Lawndale College Prep almost 15 years ago. They're trained on nonviolent conflict resolution principles and are charged with keeping students safe amid the city's ongoing struggle with gun violence. Joining us now with more on this initiative are Anaya Hill, a recent graduate from North Lawndale College Prep's Christiana campus, where she is the former president of the Peace Warriors, and Jamia Cunningham Elder, CEO of North Lawndale College Prep. Thanks to you both for joining us. And Anaya, I know you recently graduated. Congrats. We're going to come back to that if there's time. But you all planted multiple peace gardens today to commemorate Juneteenth. Why was it important for you all to do that on this particular holiday?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. I think it was important because Juneteenth is just about remembering our loved ones and celebrating the past and like all the achievements that have come with that, how far we have come since then. So I feel like it was very important to celebrate on this day.
You all led this Peace Warriors group while in school and had to undergo lots of training to resolve conflict. What did that look like? How did that training work out?
Yeah, so it's a very detailed training. There's different trainings that you can go through, but you just learn about the 6 principles, different things to combat the violence that we go through on a daily basis. It's an open space where we get to talk about hardships and like different ways to solve violence without using physical violence.
Jamia, why is it important, or how important is it to have these kinds of, peaceful spaces in communities and schools?
Absolutely. So the 6 principles are rooted in Kingian principles. So those principles came from Dr. King. And that is extremely important because for us, what our students go through, and when they come to us, they experience loss and trauma and grief. And so the Peace Warriors are committed to making sure that no student has to grieve alone, but also they interject our school with love and kindness. And that's probably the most important thing that they do.
As we mentioned earlier, it has unfortunately been a violent holiday weekend in Chicago, including where a 14 and 15-year-old were both shot, one of them fatally on the west side. What do you make of this, and what kind of impact does this violence have on young people?
It changes how our young people learn. Trauma really impacts the brain. It impacts their ability to come in and learn math. Sometimes we'll have students with their head down, or students who maybe they don't listen to a teacher, and when you get to the root of the issue, a conversation that I've had with students, many students at this point is, well, I'm missing my brother, or I'm missing a sibling. And then when you bring the parents in, they've also lost a child. And so you're dealing with family trauma and family grief that then we're telling our students, but you need to learn and be resilient and go to college. So how can we put those 2 things together and make sure that we're doing something that grows the future while also remembering the past?
It is also something that we've learned that, this kind of violence they may witness commonly. Recent research has said that the chances of a Black or Latino person having seen a shooting by the time they are age 40 is at 50% compared to about a quarter for white people. Anaya, one of the principles, as we've talked about, of the Peace Warriors is that nonviolence is a way of life, one of the Kingian principles. You're wearing a King quote on your t-shirt today. Do your peers seem to sort of struggle with remaining nonviolent in the wake of this kind of violence, and how do you make the case that nonviolence is the answer?
Yeah, so it is something that you see on a day-to-day basis, so it's kind of hard to say like it's a way of life, but at the same time people it's something that we're working towards, so there's always room for improvement and things like that. So we just keep re-emphasizing it to them, like this is something that you can do and you will do, and it's like something for us all to like. Yeah.
Jamia, is summer especially harder for young people when this kind of violence seems to escalate?
Yes, it is, and it also is. It's hard as the adult who's in charge of the school, and it's hard for the principals and teachers because the way that our students get painted in the news and the way that young Black people are painted in the news is often negative. So to be able to say, hey, here's a great day, a great story, and our students were planting gardens, right? They're not out destroying anything, they're building life, they're creating something for the future, and that's what we want more of on the news, of what our students are doing.
Just a few seconds left. What do you hope the new mayor, what action are you hoping he takes?
I hope that he comes to the table with all of us in our community, schools, health, anybody who is a community leader and who can communicate with students, and let's really get to the table and figure out how are we going to do this.
Anaya, quickly, you've just graduated. Where are you going to school in the fall?
I'm going to Grand Valley State University in Michigan.
All right, congrats, and thanks to you both for joining us, Anaya Hill and Jamia Cunningham Elder. Thanks so much.
Thank
you.
Juneteenth has become a time to re-examine the way children are taught Black history and reckoning with the ways structural racism has stifled and suppressed teaching that history in schools. TikTok creator Ernest Krim III says for him, exploring and creating Black history content has become more than an intellectual pursuit. It's also helped him heal from encountering racism in his own life. Producer Erica Gunderson has the story.
How many of you all know what stepping is? That was actually founded by Black Greeks. When I go in, I'm coming in high energy. I bring my drums because I'm telling a story. There was a period in time in which we used drums for liberation, and because of that, they were made illegal.
In his 12 years as a history teacher, Ernest Krim III used teaching Black history as a way to not just educate his students, but affirm them. He says learning Black history saved his life. And now, through anti-racism workshops and on TikTok, he wants to do the same for others.
All right, who's going first though? I'm from the south side of Chicago, West Pullman neighborhood. I went to Morgan Park High School, then I went down to U of I in Champaign. And I said, you know what, I never got a chance to take a Black history course, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And it became the driving force for me getting my grades up and graduating. I was learning so much information. To me, it was like shedding light on the issues in Chicago for the Black community. When we were forced over here, there was a period of enslavement. The Great Migration, oh, okay, segregation, redlining, that's what I'm in. And with this knowledge, I can use it proactively. So what if I was able to give this same information to the people of my community? And to me, it was a thing that would be used for our liberation, mentally and physically.
What's up, y'all? It's Mr. Ernest Krim III.
Krim's path to becoming a content creator on social media began in part due to a 2016 incident when he and his wife were verbally and physically attacked by a white woman at a festival.
She began to yell at us and call us the N-word because we grabbed the bag, and she eventually spat on us.
Krim posted video of the incident to social media, and the woman was identified and later convicted of battery. He says the experience inspired him to use social media for anti-racism and Black history content.
I decided to make a TikTok because I knew that's where all my kids were. All my students were on there, and it took off.
Krim's TikToks range from stories of historical figures to contextualizing current events.
Whenever she saw a slave catcher in action, she pulled out that thing, that knife and that boiling water. When you talk about Buffalo, New York, don't forget to mention that Buffalo was an epicenter for Black liberation during slavery.
Judging by his more than 375,000 followers, his content is striking a chord. Standing beside the monument to the Great Migration in Bronzeville, Krim reflects on the importance of seeing Black stories prominently depicted in American history.
This is where my family's story starts in recent history. My family on both sides came to Chicago on the south side in the 1950s.
And by making Black history more visible to all, Krim says he's doing his part to help correct the American record.
One of the most important things about my story is wanting people to understand that education is going to start with us first and foremost. You know, implicitly we understand that when we say U.S. or American, we're starting from a Eurocentric narrative. And oftentimes because of that, our stories are added as a footnote as opposed to being taught in conjunction because we've been here before this country was a nation. So it's like to not understand our history is to miss out on what America is today.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
You can find Ernest Krim III on, you guessed it, TikTok as Mr. Krim III.
And a note before we go tonight, as we mentioned earlier, Chicago businessman, civic leader, and philanthropist John D. Nichols Jr. has died. After graduating from Harvard, he went on to work at a number of companies, including International Telephone and Telegraph, Ford Motor Company, and NASA, among others. In 1979, he came to Chicago and became president and CEO of Illinois Tool Works.
Nichols was also known for his commitment to civic life in Chicago and philanthropy. He served on the boards of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, Lyric Opera of Chicago, and the Art Institute. There, he was instrumental in the development of the Modern Wing, as well as the Nichols Bridgeway connecting the Art Institute to Millennium Park.
Such a legacy there, and WTTW viewers are familiar with the Nichols name. John's wife, Alexandra, is a WTTW trustee, having first been elected in 1992. You hear Alexandra and John Nichols' name each evening on Chicago Tonight to acknowledge their support of WTTW and the independent news that we produce.
John Nichols is survived by Alexandra, their children, Kendra and John, and grandchildren, Mandarin, Stella, Denham, John, and Bauer. John D. Nichols Jr. was 92. And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast in the PBS video app and join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. We look at what's behind worsening drought conditions in the Chicago region.
Plus, art meets sustainability in a new partnership aimed at beautifying the West Side. And we leave you tonight with some sights and sounds from the Juneteenth community barbecue at the DuSable Black History Museum. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a wonderful evening.
What's your sin? Yeah. What's your sin? There's a lady in red. Comes up to you and says, honey, I've been watching and you look like you could use a friend. Well, I've got your fix. That's gonna give you a kick. With just one little taste of what I got here in my bag of tricks. Say, you turn down the band. Can't wait to get back. Yeah. Welcome to
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a proud sponsor of diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused free continuing legal education for lawyers throughout the region.